Chapter 685. Sitting in a remote corner, Li Yi could feel young Master Bai's resentment towards him from a distance of 30 feet away. After thinking about it carefully, he seemed to understand something. Before, he had thought that although he was a hero, it was necessary for him to attend banquets, but with Lin Wanru's temperament, how could she ask for a man? However, if she was just looking for a shield, everything would make sense. Li Yi looked at her, but Lin Wanru didn't look at him. She quickly looked away. She took out a small booklet from her sleeve and said, "There is one thing I don't quite understand about the bookkeeping method." It was obvious that she was changing the topic. She was so smart, so how could she not understand the simple bookkeeping method after such a long time? She saw through it, but she didn't point it out. Otherwise, both of them would be embarrassed. Li nodded and said, "What do you not understand?" "Let me see." Not far away, beside a table, the young man with the surname Bai looked somewhere and clenched his fists tightly. He took a deep breath to calm himself down. Seeing two people coming over, he smiled and stood up to greet them. "Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su, long time no see. Hey, isn't this young Master Bai? Long time no see, long time no see." "Well, you go ahead. I will sit here for a while and eat something." Li Yi waved his hand, and Lin Wanru, who was absent-minded, came back to herself. She nodded and said, "Then I will go first." Watching her leave, Li took a piece of fresh fruit and vegetables from the table. The Qian family prepared enough drinks and snacks, and they tasted good. Except for Lin Wanru, he didn't know anyone else here. Tonight, the people in the manor were all in small groups. Those who had business dealings with each other naturally gathered together. There were several places where there were many people, and they surrounded one or two people in the innermost area with smiles on their faces. Those people should be the famous businessmen in Fengzhou City. Feeling bored, Zhang Xian casually swept his gaze across the area and saw a familiar fatty walking out from a door. There were two other people beside the fat man. They were both handsome and elegant young men. Li Yi was about to put a piece of preserved fruit into his mouth when his wrist stopped in midair. "Why are they here?" he murmured with a surprised expression. He was surprised to see Zhao Shuan there. After all, although he was also in Fengzhou, it was unlikely that he would appear on such an occasion. But the person beside him seemed to be the former top scholar of Qing and Yang Yanzhou. He and Yang Yanzhou had met twice before. Although they weren't familiar with each other, he shouldn't have mistaken him for someone else. Reaching out to touch his face, he felt at ease. Anything could happen in Jianghu. It was very important to open a SMUF account. Otherwise, he would be recognized today. As the two of them walked out, the surroundings immediately became restless. "Is that young Master Zhao and young Master Yang? Why are they here?" Young Master Zhao and young Master Yang are His Highness's right-hand men. Fortune god Qian and them seem to be very familiar. Why do you think the Qian family has been so successful in Fengzhou for so many years? If they didn't have the third prince's support, hearing the quiet discussions of the crowd, Li Yi's expression froze. He then lowered his head and rubbed the space between his brows. There was too much information. He needed to process it all. Yang Yanzhou, Zhao Shuan, Fortune god Qian, they were all the third prince's men of the Qi kingdom. Fengzhou was the territory of the third prince, Zhao Yi. His manor was in Fengzhou City. Did this mean that he had been in front of the third prince of the Qi kingdom all this time? Back when he was still in the capital, the third prince had specially paid him a visit. He gave him a jade pendant and said something sincere. He probably meant that if he couldn't survive in the Jing kingdom, he could go to the Qi kingdom and rely on him. The two of them would hold hands and do something spectacular. But for now, Li Yi didn't have such a plan. If he had directly revealed his identity, his current situation would naturally be much better. But he was afraid that in the future, he would be under the control of others in everything he did. The day when he could return to the Jing kingdom was even more distant. If he had known that he would meet them here, he wouldn't have come out. The current situation was still passable. Based on Mississippi Lu's recovery speed, they would probably be able to set off for home in another 2 or 3 months. Before that, they couldn't afford to make any mistakes. Speaking of which, the jade pendant that Zhao Yi gave him was lost. It seemed that it was taken by Mississippi Lou on that day, and he hadn't seen it since. As if he had thought of something, Li Yi's face revealed a startled expression. Not long after, he sighed. He was afraid that he would not be able to redeem the jade pendant that he had borrowed from Miss Lu. Even a pawnshop from before could not be used again. Fortunately, he was wearing a bamboo hat at that time, and the shopkeeper did not see his face. Otherwise, he would be in trouble now. What's wrong? Lin Wanru walked over and asked when she saw that he didn't look right. Li Yi pointed and said, "Those two people over there." Lin Wanru looked over and said, "You mean Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou? They are very famous in Feng Province. Zhao Xiuwen is even known as the role model of scholars. He is well known in the entire Qi Kingdom. It's normal for these people to surround them." Li looked at her and asked with some uncertainty, "Is the third prince of the Qi Kingdom also in Feng Province?" Lin Wanru nodded and said, "Feng Province is the third prince's fief. King Feng's mansion is in Feng Province." After confirming everything from Lin Wanru, Li looked in that direction and watched Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou leave surrounded by people. Then he withdrew his gaze. Seeing that Lin Wanru was also looking in that direction, he asked curiously, "Don't you like Zhao Xiuwen? Why don't you go over?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I just admire his literary talent. I don't like him." Seeing that she seemed to be a little annoyed, Li said, "What did you talk about just now? What's wrong? Did it not work out?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I don't know why, but the Ma family and the Su family increased the price of raw materials by 10%. In Feng Province, apart from these two families, only the Bai family can provide raw materials to make jewelry. Fragrant Forest Garden has always been working with these three families. If we don't want to lose our profits, we can only choose the Bai family. However, it is very likely that the Bai family is behind this. After they achieve this goal, they will definitely have other tricks up their sleeves. If we put all our hopes on the Bai family, we will definitely be led by the nose in the future." Li looked at her and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "At present, there is still a lot of stock in the shop. It can support us for a while. We will think of a way when the time comes." Li Yi could not help her with this matter. He still had a lot of things to solve. Feng Province, the third prince, things in this world were really coincidental. The so-called meeting was extremely boring. The only thing he gained was some information that was very important to him. Lin Wanru took out the booklet again and picked up a pen from the table. She seemed to be calculating something. After a while, she flipped through the booklet, stood up and looked around. "What's wrong? Did you lose something?" Li looked at her and asked. "The piece of paper you just used to demonstrate," Lin Wanru said. She saw a fat man not far away pick up an item from the ground and said, "I found it. It's over there." When she was about to walk over, a hand reached out from the side and held her wrist.
"Sit down."
Li looked over and said in a low voice. Not far away, the fat middle-aged man was holding a piece of paper in his hand and looking at it carefully. Chapter 686. Regular gatherings of this nature were not just for a chat or a meal. The people present were businessmen of all sizes. If they got along well with each other and had the same opinion, it was very likely that a partnership could be finalized on the spot. Some of the decisions made by the top businessmen could even affect the economic direction of the entire Feng Province in the future. This was the main purpose of this kind of banquet. Therefore, there were pens and paper everywhere in the manor. From time to time, people could be seen writing and calculating, discussing the distribution of profits and so on. It was unknown whether everyone was like Lin Wanru, who had the habit of carrying a small notebook with her. Not only did it have the function of a memo, but it could also record ideas and inspirations at any time. Lin Yong had once said that many of the jewelry styles in Fonglin Park were personally designed by her. Not only that, but she could also take out a small notebook and pretend to ask questions to cover up her embarrassment. However, the piece of paper that had just fallen out was not a jewelry style, nor was it a memo. It was a classic model of the debit and credit bookkeeping method that he had listed. "What's wrong?" Lin Wanru looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully, "Just sit there and don't move." Li Yi threw a small piece of watermelon into his mouth and glanced in the direction of the fat man. Lin Wanru whispered, "That is the master of the Qian family. People call him the god of wealth." As soon as she finished speaking, the fat middle-aged man put the piece of paper in his sleeve and looked around. After a long time, he turned around and walked to a brighter place in the house. According to the usual practice, every meeting would last more than 2 hours. Most of the time, people would communicate in groups of 3 to 5. At the end of the meeting, some big businessmen with status would routinely say a few words, and so on. Some people left in high spirits, while others returned disappointed. Every meeting would change the economic structure of Feng Province in the future, big or small. Just now, why didn't you let me go? At the entrance of Fonglin Park, Lin Wanru, who had been silent all the way, finally asked the question in her heart. Li looked at her and asked, "You haven't told anyone about that method, right?"
No.
Lin Wanru shook her head. "That's good." Li knocked on the courtyard door, turned around and said, "Forget about this matter, and don't let anyone know that you know that method. At least not now." The confusion on Lin Wanru's face deepened. Just as she was about to ask again, the courtyard door opened from the inside. "See you tomorrow." Li Yi waved at her, turned around and walked in. Lin Wanru stood rooted to the ground for a long time before she shook her head and decided not to think about this matter for the time being. She turned around and said to the Lin family guards, "Let's go back as well." "Why did you come back so late?" Mississippi Lu covered her mouth, and her voice was full of tiredness. "That fatty took too long." Li Yi handed her a bag of things and said, "That store's preserved fruit is quite delicious.
Try it."
"It's too late. We'll talk about it tomorrow." Mississippi Lu took the paper bag, opened it, put a piece of dried fruit in her mouth, and turned to walk into the house. Li Yi looked down and found that her ankles were bare. He shook his head and said, "The ground is dirty. Next time you come out, remember to wear shoes." He walked into the house. The light in the room was on, but it was soon extinguished. In the Qian family, under the bright lights, the fat face of the Qian god of fortune was full of spirit. "Good stuff, good stuff." He patted his thigh and couldn't help but exclaim. Qian Duo came over and asked, "Dad, what's the good stuff?" The Qian god of fortune waved his hand and said, Go to the accounting room and bring me last month's account book." Qian Duo asked doubtfully, "Dad, what do you want the account book for?"
Go.
The Qian god of fortune said impatiently. Qian Duo immediately stood up and trotted outside. Not long after, he carried a stack of accounts and walked in, huffing and puffing. "Put it here." The Qian god of fortune pointed to the table next to him and moved the lamp to his side. Qian Duo moved a chair and sat down opposite him, looking at him with puzzled and curious eyes. The Qian god of fortune took the pen and ink, spread out a piece of paper, opened 2 account books, and recorded something on the paper from time to time. Qian Duo looked at the opposite side with his hand supporting his chin. He only saw the pages turning and the lights flickering. After a while, his eyelids became heavy. Clatter. The sky was bright. Qian Duo rubbed his head, got up from the ground, straightened the chair, and finally wiped the remaining saliva from the corner of his mouth. When he looked up, he was surprised and said, "Dad, you didn't sleep last night?" As his voice fell, the Qian god of fortune put down the pen, raised his arm, stretched his waist, and sighed. "I'm old. It's only one night, and my body can't stand it anymore." Qian Duo hurried over and gently beat his shoulder. "Good stuff." The Qian god of fortune picked up a piece of paper from the table and said, "Qian Datong, Zhang Xian Mawei. Duo, tell them to call these managers for me." Qian Duo nodded and said, "Okay, Dad, you go and rest for a while. I'll go right away." The Qian god of fortune rubbed his eyebrows, but he did not rest. He picked up another piece of paper, touched the short beard on his chin, and wrote on it. After a while, Qian Duo came in from outside and said, "Dad, they're here?" The Qian god of fortune waved his hand and said, "Okay, you go out first." Qian Duo looked at him with some doubts. When he left, he closed the door. A middle-aged man in the middle of the three said with a smile, "I don't know why the shopkeeper is looking for us." The Qian god of fortune glanced at them and asked faintly, "Datong, how long have the three of you been with me?" In reply to the shopkeeper, 5 years. A trace of doubt appeared on the middle-aged man's face, and then he said. The two people looked at each other, and a trace of joy quickly appeared on their faces. The shopkeeper rarely asked these questions. Did he want to promote the old people of the Chamber of Commerce? 5 years. The Qian god of fortune sighed and said, "In 5 years, even a dog knows how to wag its tail. How can I raise you 3 ungrateful wolves?" When he said this, he stood up from the chair, and the momentum of his whole body suddenly changed. The bodies of the 3 people trembled. When they looked up, they seemed to see a mountain pressing down from the front. In the early morning, Li opened the door. The street was already full of pedestrians, and the Fonglin Yuan next to it had already opened. He came back very late yesterday, and he was tossed around by Mississippi Lu until late at night, saying that he woke her up and that she wanted to listen to some martial arts story. Li covered his mouth and yawned. When he was about to turn around and go back, he saw Lin Wanru coming from a distance. "Good morning, Miss Lin." Li waved to her from a distance. Last night, he didn't explain too much to her. The power of debit and credit was more powerful than the power of heaven's punishment. If it was not handled properly, people might die. Without enough strength, it was better not to get involved. This matter had already been confirmed in the Jing kingdom. Morning. Lin Wanru nodded slightly to him, walked past him, and walked into the shop. When he shook his head and planned to go back to prepare breakfast for Mississippi Lu, who had not yet gotten up, Lin Yong's loud voice came from the shop next to him. "Go, go, go. What Great Britain and Little Britain? If you want to eat, go somewhere else. Don't disturb our business." Li's footsteps stopped. Chapter 687. Did you hear that? Go, go. In the shop in Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong waved his hand impatiently at the beggars in front of him and said, "It's not time to eat yet. There's no extra food here for you." Lin Wanru walked in from outside and happened to see Lin Yong driving away the beggars. She thought for a moment and said, "Brother Lin, go buy a few steamed buns for them and let them go." Lin Yong took out a dozen copper coins from his waist and slapped them on the table in front of him. He said, take it. Don't make trouble here." "We're not here to make trouble here." The leader, a man with unkempt hair and a dirty face, stammered, "We want to do business with you." Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves and said, "I've given you the money. Go quickly. Don't make trouble here. If you don't leave, don't blame me for being rude." "Brother Lin, I'll leave it to you," Lin Wanru said, and walked toward the backyard. When she came in just now, she seemed to have heard a familiar word from Lin Yong, but it just flashed in her mind and disappeared. She couldn't remember it no matter how hard she tried. She shook her head and stopped thinking about it. The Ma family and the Su family had cut off the source of raw materials for Fonglin Garden. This matter had to be resolved as soon as possible. Otherwise, the Lin family stock would not last long. "We're from Great Britain." Seeing that the beggars still dared to talk nonsense, Lin Yong finally showed a hint of anger on his face. When he was about to raise his head and roll up his sleeves, a voice came from outside the door. "You're from Great Britain." Li walked in from outside the door and looked at the unkempt men. He asked, "The United Kingdom of Northern Ireland? How did you?" The man in the lead looked shocked and almost blurted out. He suddenly changed his words halfway and said, "How do you know our country?" Li asked with a smile, "How is Queen Elizabeth?" The men trembled slightly, and the way they looked at him immediately changed. Lin Yong scratched his head, walked over and asked, "Li brothers, what are you talking about? Is there really something big? Great Britain? What does the Queen mean? Can a woman be a king? How come I've never heard of it?" "You'll know if you read more books." Li nodded. "In their country, a woman can be the emperor. There's such a thing in the world." Lin Yong's face was full of shock. It was obvious that his worldview had been turned upside down. He asked, "Then can their empress have many husbands? Can she handle it alone?" Lin Yong's focus was always so unique. Li shook his head and said, "It's not mentioned in the book. I've only seen descriptions of Great Britain in books before. This is the first time I've met them. I have to find a place to understand the customs of Great Britain. As for whether their queen can handle it, I'll help you ask later." Li looked at them and said, "Guys, do you want to go next door and sit down?" The man with unkempt hair and dirty face proudly said, "You will certainly fall for the glory of our the rising sun city." Watching them go out, Lin Yong seemed to think of something. He ran to the door and shouted, "Li brothers, don't forget to ask for me."
Got it.
Li waved his hand to him and closed the courtyard door.
Who are you?
The moment he closed the courtyard door, the men immediately raised their heads and looked at him vigilantly. The man in the lead said in a deep voice, "You. How do you know, Elizabeth?" All right, are you tired of talking like this?" Li waved his hand. He stretched one hand to his ear, and a thin layer of something was torn off his face. The man in the lead was stunned, and his face instantly showed surprise. He asked, "Young master, why are you here?"
Who are they?
Mississippi Lu came out of the house and looked at the several people in the courtyard. She held autumn water in her hand. "This subordinate greets the Union Lord." Several members of the Lu alliance saw her and immediately bowed. Their voices were loud and resounded throughout the courtyard. "Li brothers, what's the situation inside? What are their names?" Lin Yong's voice came from outside. Li replied loudly, "It's nothing. They said that their queen also has 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines, similar to our emperor here." 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. Lin Yong touched his chin and thought of the picture of many women entangled together. He couldn't help but lick his lips suddenly, as if he remembered something. He looked up and asked, 3 palaces and 6 courtyards and 72 concubines. Are they men or women?" "Men." A voice soon came from the courtyard. "Men." Lin Yong touched his chin again. The next moment his body trembled and his face suddenly turned pale. "Don't you have a few hundred taels of silver in the time it takes to drink a cup of tea? Why do you have time to come here today?" In King Feng's residence, Zhao Yi looked at a fat man and asked with a smile, "Silver is important, but how can it compare to your highness's important matter?" Money God of Wealth stood up from his chair and said, "This time, I came to show something to your highness. Could it be another rare treasure?" Zhao Yi looked at him and smiled. "If that's the case, Yanzhou, Shou and you two come over too. Let's see what kind of rare thing Money God of Wealth has this time." Money God of Wealth shook his head and took out an item from his sleeve. He handed it to Zhao Yi and said, "Your Highness, this is it." Zhao Yi opened the box and saw that there was only a piece of paper inside. He picked it up in confusion and looked at it. He shook his head and said, "Don't keep me in suspense. Could it be that this piece of paper is a treasure?" Money God of Wealth nodded and said, "This piece of paper is indeed a treasure." At this time, Zhao Yi also became interested. He looked at him and said, "Since it is a treasure, tell me, what is its use?" Money God of Wealth said slowly, "Its use is to make Qi Kingdom free of corruption and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean." After being stunned for a while, Zhao Yi looked at him with a strange light in his eyes and asked word by word, "Is this true?" Money God of Wealth nodded and said, "Yes." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Yanzhou, Shouwen, come over and have a look." Although Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Shouwen were both well-known talents in Qi Kingdom, they also realized the importance of this piece of paper after Money God of Wealth's explanation. When it came to things like accounts, businessmen were more sensitive. Money God of Wealth is worthy of being called Money God of Wealth. Yang Yanzhou saluted him and said, "If this method can be implemented, Money God of Wealth will take the lead." "Is there really such a strange thing?" It can make Qi Kingdom free of corruption and the government offices free of parasites. The officials are self-disciplined, the national treasury is full, and the whole world is clean. As a voice came from outside the door, several figures came in from outside. The one walking in front was a young man in luxurious clothes. At this moment, he was looking at them with sharp eyes. His Royal Highness Prince Hung. First Prince. Money God of Wealth's face showed doubt, while Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen's expressions changed slightly. I didn't know that you were coming. Zhao, Yi didn't go out to meet you. I hope you don't take offense, Zhao Yi said slowly with a smile on his face. It's okay. The young man in luxurious clothes waved his hand and turned back to look at Money God of Wealth. He asked again, what you said just now, is it true? With just this piece of paper, you can completely wipe out the corrupt officials and restore Daki to a clean country? Money God of Wealth glanced at Zhao Yi out of the corner of his eye. After a moment, he nodded slightly. After temporarily sending away the foreign businessmen, when Li Yi walked back, Lin Wanru walked out of the shop. She still hadn't let go of something in her heart. She looked at him and asked, if the method of checking accounts is known, what will happen? Actually, it's nothing. Li looked at her and said, at most, the situation will be unstable. The whole country will be in turmoil, heads will fall, and blood will flow like a river. Chapter 688. I failed to stop the first prince and ruined your highness's plan. Please punish me, your highness. In a hall of the prince's mansion, more than 10 guards of King Feng's mansion knelt in a row. They looked extremely remorseful. The third prince, Zhao Yi, waved his hand and said, get up. If my brother wants to force his way in, you can't stop him. Fortune God of Qian walked forward and said, your highness, although the first prince took that piece of paper, what was recorded on it was very simple. Ordinary people couldn't understand it at all. I can write a more detailed version now. That's not the most important thing. Zhao Yi looked out of the window and pondered. After a while, he said, even if this method is effective in punishing corrupt officials, we can't be too hasty. We have to do it step by step and plan slowly. Otherwise, I'm afraid the disadvantages will outweigh the advantages. More than half of the imperial court will be involved. At that time, the situation will be out of control. Fortune God of Qian looked puzzled. Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen nodded slightly. Corrupt officials had existed since ancient times, and there was no end to them. Even though the Qi Kingdom was powerful, there were many corrupt officials regardless of whether it was the central government or the officials of the various regions. If they were to carry out a drastic reform, it would definitely implicate countless people. It was unknown how many people would lose their lives. This would cause the people to panic and the political situation to become unstable. This was not their goal. This method could only be used gently. If it was done too hastily, there would be extremely serious consequences. But the first prince has always been eager for quick success and benefits. This time, he won't let it go easily. Those censors are also stubborn. This time, he left the capital to supervise the various prefectures. With this method, he will be like a tiger that has grown wings. Zhao Xiuwen paced in the hall and said slowly, he has always seen Feng Province as a thorn in his side. This time, he has bad intentions. He will definitely start with Feng Province. Your Highness, you must be careful. Zhao Yi rubbed his right thumb and index finger gently. After a while, he turned to look at Yang Yanzhou and said, Yanzhou, what do you think? Yang Yanzhou thought for a while and said, this is a rare opportunity for the first prince. Isn't it the same for us? He raised his head and said again, the first prince has always been eager for success. This time, he will definitely make things difficult for your highness. Feng Province has nowhere to hide, and the neighboring prefectures will also be affected. Your highness, why don't you push the boat with the current and thoroughly investigate Feng Province? First, you can find the parasites. Second, you can eliminate the people they have planted in Feng Province all these years. This way, the two parties can supervise each other. No one can play. If the prince wants to investigate, you can. If the first wants to investigate, you will phone province and prince. If prince wants, you can only phone province. The god of wealth Qian scratched his head, and the confusion on his face grew. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, why do we have to ask for the first prince's credit? What good will it do for us? What will happen after we ask for the credit? Zhao Xuan said, after we ask for the credit, His Majesty will certainly praise the first prince. Everyone in the court knows that the first prince has a powerful weapon in his hands. He can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. Maybe the prefectures that have been investigated before will be investigated again. Wherever the first prince goes, the officials will panic, and the people will line the streets to welcome him. The god of wealth Qian looked at Zhao Xuan and then at Yang Yanzhou. He secretly swallowed his saliva. Wouldn't this make the first prince offend all the officials of the Qi kingdom? When he looked at the two again, his gaze had changed greatly. It seemed that not letting Duo take the top scholars exam was the right thing to do. He decided that in the future, he must keep his son away from these sinister scholars. Compared with them, what was the deception in the business world? By the way, where did you get this thing? Zhao Yi suddenly looked at the god of wealth Qian and asked. The god of wealth Qian was startled and said, I picked it up. In a certain post house in Fengzhou City, a few imperial censors were sitting around a table. They had been staring at a piece of paper for almost half an hour. Do you understand it? The young man in luxurious clothes asked as he walked in with his hands behind his back. One of the censors lowered his head and said, Your Highness, the things recorded on this piece of paper are messy and unorganized. I really can't understand it. The young man in luxurious clothes frowned and asked, No one understands it. All of these censors were knowledgeable and talented, but they couldn't even compare to one of Zhao Yi's subordinates. This made him slightly angry. He thought for a moment and said, Go and find out who the fat man in King Feng's mansion is. The god of wealth Qian walked out of King Feng's mansion with a gloomy face. The treasure that he wanted to present to the third prince had been taken away halfway. He was naturally depressed. However, this person who came out of nowhere was someone that even the third prince could not afford to offend. He could only swallow his anger. Are you the god of wealth Qian? When he was about to reach the gate of the Qian mansion, two people suddenly flashed out from the side. The god of wealth Qian was startled. Seeing the cold faces of the two people, he looked at them in confusion and said, Who are you? Why are you looking for my brother? The two people were stunned and asked, The god of wealth Qian is your brother? Yes. The god of wealth Qian nodded and asked, Why are you looking for my brother? I'll go in and help you call him out. After that, he walked toward the gate of the mansion. He had just taken 2 steps when another figure walked out from the side. He could clearly see that this person was the one who had been following the first prince. The person looked at him and said lightly, The first prince wants to see you.
Come with me.
The god of wealth Qian's expression changed and said, Why is the first prince looking for me? The person waved his hand. You'll know when you get there. Are you the god of wealth Qian? The well-dressed young man looked at the fat man in front of him and asked with a smile. The god of wealth Qian immediately bowed and said, I don't deserve to be called the god of wealth Qian Duo. Greetings, your highness. I wonder why you summoned me here. The first prince picked up the piece of paper and said, Did you really create such a wonderful method? The god of wealth Qian looked up and said, It's just some petty cleverness. It's not elegant. Your highness, you flatter me. You don't have to be modest. It's not petty cleverness. The first prince smiled and said, I was worried about how to clean up the country's vermin. This method is of great use to our Qi kingdom. You should take the lead. When I return to the capital, I will ask for your merit in front of the emperor. The god of wealth Qian was stunned, and then his face turned pale. He immediately said, Your highness, please don't. It's my honor to be able to solve your highness's worries. I can't take credit for it. Otherwise, I'm afraid that I won't be able to sleep at night because of fear. If all the corrupt officials knew that this thing was made by him, they would indeed not be able to sleep peacefully in the future. The god of wealth Qian said sincerely, All this is the credit of your highness. I'm very satisfied to be able to do something for your highness in silence, behind your back. The first prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at him, nodded with satisfaction, and said, "You are a smart man who knows how to adapt to circumstances." He had thought that it would take more effort to persuade him to switch to him. He didn't expect that the god of wealth Qian was so sensible. Zhao Zheng was very comforted. I was ordered to supervise all the states and prefectures, and it takes time and effort to check the accounts. This time, you have helped I a lot. You can rest assured that I will not treat anyone who has made great contributions unfairly. As long as you do your best to do things for I, you will enjoy endless glory and wealth in the future. The god of wealth Qian's face was full of fear and trepidation. He bowed and said, "Thank you, your highness." Zhao Zheng nodded, handed him the piece of paper, and said, "Go and tell them in detail how to use this method." "Yes, sir." The god of wealth Qian nodded, picked up the piece of paper, and walked over. At the gate of King Feng's mansion, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen walked out. When they walked down the steps, Zhao Xiuwen suddenly turned his head and asked, "Yanzhou, do you think the god of wealth Qian will make any mistakes?" Yang Yanzhou shook his head and said, "Don't underestimate that old fox." Chapter 689. This is actually very simple. As long as you remember that there is an input and an output, the cumbersome accounts will become simple. You can save a lot of time and reduce the possibility of miscalculation. Fortune God Qian explained very seriously and in great detail. He talked incessantly. His saliva sprayed on the face of an imperial censor, but the censor didn't bother to wipe it off, for fear of missing any important steps. Although they were still full of contempt and contempt for the merchants, the first prince attached great importance to this matter, so they naturally had to pay attention to it. "Your Highness, I will leave first." After half an hour, Fortune God Qian cupped his hands and bowed to Zhao Zheng. Zhao Zheng nodded and said, "Thank you for your hard work.
You can leave now."
Don't worry, I will treat you well in the future." After Fortune God Qian left, an imperial censor came forward and bowed. "Congratulations, Your Highness. With this wonderful method, you will definitely make some achievements to satisfy His Majesty and the court officials." "God is helping me." Zhao Zheng smiled and said, "You should familiarize yourselves with each other first. Tomorrow we will start from Fengzhou." Everyone's faces showed joy. Before they came to Fengzhou, they had some plans. Now that they had such a wonderful method, it was like God was helping them. It would be much easier and more convenient to do things. They would make great achievements in Fengzhou. Not only could the first prince shake the third prince's layout and arrangement in Fengzhou, but they could also get enough political achievements. It was really killing two birds with one stone. Bah! Fortune God Qian walked more than 10 steps out of the courier house. The panic on his face disappeared. He spat to the side and whispered, "Do you think it is so easy to take advantage of me?" In an inn somewhere in Fengzhou, 15 people stood in 2 rows in a room. They cupped their hands and said, "Greetings, Chief." The people that Lu Meng arranged to sell colored glaze were divided into groups of 15. 5 of them were in the open and disguised as foreign merchants. The other 10 were in the dark and belonged to 2 groups of inspection teams. The 3 groups supervised each other and restrained each other to ensure that there would be no embezzlement or escape with the treasures. The Golden Jade Pavilion of the Jing Kingdom was the main target of the Lu Meng. Later, for the sake of safety, they would go to further places such as the Qi Kingdom, the Zhao Kingdom, and so on. It seemed to be a coincidence that they met them here, but it was inevitable. A middle-aged man said in surprise, "On our way here, we also got the news from the brothel. We only heard that the young master and the chief last appeared in Suzhou. I didn't expect to meet them here." Li looked at him and asked, "Are there only 15 of you who have come to the Qi Kingdom?" "For now, we are the only team." The middle-aged man nodded and said, "Young master, alliance master, should we go back immediately?" Li glanced at Mississippi Lu and said, "There's no hurry. The most important thing now is to send the news back to the capital. We need someone to go back first." We'll set off immediately. To some extent, this place was safer than Shuzhou. After all, Fengzhou was too far from the capital. What's more, they had to pass through Shuzhou. If there were only 15 people, there was no guarantee that nothing would go wrong. A month ago, the news from Shuzhou had been sent back. Rui and the others should have received the news by now and made some arrangements. What they needed to do now was to get in touch with them first, and then wait. At most, in a month, Mississippi Lu's body would be much better, and there would be no more worries in Shuzhou. I'll write a letter first and ask someone to send it all the way back. Get in touch with the brothel in Shuzhou and pay attention to the news from Shuzhou. Don't forget the important thing. After you go out of this door, you are foreign merchants. Li gave a few instructions. After a while, a man came out of the inn with a horse. After leaving the city, he immediately jumped on the horse and galloped in a certain direction. In the capital of the Jing Kingdom, the little maid was sitting in the yard. When she saw a figure coming out of the house, she hurriedly stood up and ran over to say, "Miss, be careful. I'll help you." Rui shook her head and said, "It hasn't been long. Miss is not so delicate." The little maid shook her head and said, "The old granny said that you have to take care of yourself now. What do you want to eat today? I'll make it." Rui touched her head and said, "You've been busy these days.
Take a rest.
Just tell the kitchen to do these things."
No.
The little maid shook her head like a rattle drum and said, "Miss, the baby will grow better if you eat better." She leaned her head over and listened carefully. She asked, "When can I see the baby?" Rui thought for a moment and said, "Probably in the winter of this year." "In the winter, the son-in-law should be able to come back," the little maid murmured as she looked up at the sky outside the courtyard walls. At a certain moment, the door to the courtyard was suddenly pushed open. Old Fong ran in with a happy expression. He panted heavily and said, "Young miss, there's news about the son-in-law and the second young miss." Fong bent over and panted as he said, "The brothel." The news came from the brothel. "The son-in-law and the second miss are in Shuzhou." Shuzhou. The little maid clenched her fists and murmured. A smile appeared on Rui's face. She said, "Send someone to the Li family first and tell the old granny this news. Send someone to the Crown Prince's residence as well, and a few of the general's residences." And she lowered her head and said softly, "Willow Lane. Go personally." The entire Li family was thoroughly stirred up because of a certain piece of news. Fast horses galloped out of the mansion, turning into wisps of smoke and dust as they scattered in all directions. In the Li manor, the old granny knelt in the temple with tears in her old eyes. In the Shui manor, several old generals drank to their heart's content and started fighting as they drank. What did you just say?
Say it again.
In the Crown Prince's residence, after listening to a guard's report, Li Xian, who was drawing some kind of diagram, suddenly stood up. Only a few words echoed in the room. Willow Lane was as peaceful as ever. In the deepest part of the lane, in a quiet courtyard, Zheng Zimo put down her brush and said, "Let them make a set like this first. If there's anything that needs to be changed, I will let them know." "Yes, young lady. I will go now." A woman behind her nodded, picked up the drawing, and left the courtyard. Zheng Zimo sat back in her seat and rubbed her sore shoulders. The next moment, there was a gentle force on both sides of her shoulders. She stood up, held Wan Ruoqing's hand, and said, "Didn't the doctor say that you should rest at home these days? What if you catch a cold again? Go in quickly." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "It's so stuffy staying in the room all the time. I have to come out for some fresh air." "Then you sit here. I will go in and get some clothes for you." Zheng Zimo pressed her down and turned to walk into the room. There was a knock on the door. Xiao Chui, who was washing clothes in the corridor, quickly ran over and opened the door. She asked with a smile, "Uncle Fong, you haven't been here for a long time. What's the matter?" Lao Fong walked in and walked up to Wan Ruoqing. He said, "There's news about the son-in-law. He should be in Shuzhou now. We'll send someone to pick him up right away." Wan Ruoqing slowly stood up. At the door of the room, the thin shirt in Zheng Zimo's hands gently fell to the ground. At the palace gate, The guards on the palace wall looked down and shouted, "Who goes there?" Below the palace walls, a person nimbly dismounted from his horse and tossed a waste token onto the wall. Urgent report from the Intelligence Bureau. I must see His Majesty immediately. Chapter 690. After verifying the identity of the Secret Intelligence Division, a basket was slowly lowered from the palace wall and the person from the Secret Intelligence Division was hoisted up. Soon, several figures rushed into the palace. As they hurried away, a eunuch turned around and asked the man, "His Majesty is already asleep. Are you sure this matter is urgent enough to wake His Majesty up now?" The spy nodded and said, "His Majesty has ordered that as soon as there is news of County Markeely, we must report it immediately." "County Markeely?" The eunuch glanced at him and said, "Wait here for a moment, I'll go and report." After that, he quickly walked to a palace in front of him. Before he reached the front of the palace, a voice came from the side. "Why disturb His Majesty so late at night?" The eunuch turned around and hurriedly bowed and said, "Greetings, Chief Steward Chong." Chong just said lightly, "His Majesty has just fallen asleep. If it's not urgent, we'll talk about it tomorrow." The eunuch respectfully said, "Chief Steward Chong, the spy office has urgent news of County Markeely." Chongda raised his eyebrows and said, "Let him wait here." After that, he quickly took 2 steps and pushed the door into the main hall. Not long after, lights were lit in the palace. Emperor Jing put on a robe and paced in the hall. He read the letter in his hand several times and said, "The spy office will send 20 high priests to bring him back to me unharmed. After arriving in Shuzhou, take over the soldiers of Shuzhou first, so that it's easier to act. If there's any disobedience, you can kill him first and report later." "Yes, Your Majesty." Chongda bowed and said. Before the sky was bright, a group of people hurried out of the city with a token and went all the way to the west. At the city gate, Chongda reined in his horse and said to a middle-aged Taoist in front of him, surnamed Yuan, "This time, I'll leave County Markeely to you. His Majesty has an order to bring him back unharmed."
"I'll try my best."
The middle-aged Taoist raised his hand to salute, turned his head and said slowly, "Let's go." As Li Xian rode on his horse, he asked doubtfully, "Just the few of them? Can they do it?" Chongda turned his horse around and explained, "There's only one Grandmaster. The rest of them are all below the level of Grandmaster, and there are few who can match them. It's impossible to attack a city, but it's easy to take the head of the enemy's general amidst an army of tens of thousands. Besides, they have His Majesty's imperial edict in their hands. Wherever they go, they can temporarily mobilize 500 soldiers. It's already very safe." "It's been 2 months." Li Xian nodded, reined in his horse, and returned to the city. 50 li outside the capital, in a huge plaza. Lu Luo stood on the platform and looked down at the crowd of nearly 100 people and loudly said, "The journey to the Shu province is long. Everyone, please be careful." Yang Liuqing waved his hand and said, "Let's go." Watching the figures of the crowd gradually disappear, Lu Luo walked down from the high platform and said to the others, "Go back to your work." This time, almost all the elites of the Lu League had come. Among the 100 people, any one of them would have a resounding name on the hero ranking. This kind of power was enough to sweep away any force in the martial arts world. The Li family. "Miss, let me go with them," Lao Fong, who was carrying a bag on his back, said with determination. Rui looked at him and said, "They've sent over 100 masters this time. Nothing will go wrong." Fong shook his head and said, "I lost the son-in-law. If I can't find him myself, I won't be able to rest in peace for the rest of my life." A woman walked over and said, "Eldest miss, just let him go." Rui looked at Aunt Fong. After a moment, she nodded slightly. A hint of excitement appeared on Fong's face. He said, "Don't worry, Mississippi. Once we find the son-in-law and second miss, we'll be back immediately." With that, he tightened the bag on his back, hugged his wife tightly, and dashed out without looking back. The woman blushed. This dead man. Life was always full of surprises. There were many unexpected things. No one knew what was going to happen in the next second. Maybe it would be a hard slap to wake you up and teach you to be a good person. Maybe it would be a big gift from the sky, the kind with a bow on the outside to tell you how beautiful the world was. After being unlucky for so long, his luck had finally changed. It was time to celebrate. He wrapped the freshly made milk candy with glutinous rice paper. When it cooled down, it could be eaten. With this thing, Mississippi Lou would be much more straightforward when she took the medicine. She didn't have to force herself every time. After a long time, the way she looked at him made Lee feel a little guilty. Good things should be shared with everyone. He put some in the box that had just been dried and planned to give them to Lin Yong and Lin Wanru. After Lin Yong threw a piece into his mouth, his eyes lit up. He asked, "Lee brothers, what is this? It's so delicious.
Give me a few more."
"These are all for you." Lee poured a small half of the contents of the box for him and said, "As for the rest, when your miss comes over, let her have a taste." Lin Yong waved his hand and said, "I have to look after the shop in the front. Miss is in the back. You can go by yourself." He had been familiar with Lee for a long time, so he gradually spoke more casually. All right. You look after the shop. I'll go by myself." Lee waved his hand and walked to the room in the backyard. In the yard, he saw Lin Wanru writing something at the table. Lee knocked on the door and walked in. He put the box on the table and said, "I just made it. Try it." Lin Wanru looked at him, picked up a piece, and put it in her mouth. She nodded slightly and asked, "Is Miss Lu feeling better?" "Much better." Lee nodded. He saw the words by family and Su family written on the paper in front of her. There seemed to be some numbers behind them. He thought of something and asked, "What's wrong? Haven't you solved the problem of the raw materials?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "We haven't reached an agreement with the Su family and the Ma family. Raising the price by 10% should be their first step. If we agree, I'm afraid they will immediately ask for more. As for the Bai family, I'm just like them." Lee looked at her and asked, "What are you going to do?" Lin Wanru said, "Find someone else to cooperate with. If Fonglin Park doesn't pick up the goods from the three families, the jewelry shops in Feng Province won't be able to handle the goods from the three families. When that time comes, they will be anxious." Lee thought about it and said, "Speaking of this, I know a few friends who might be able to solve your problem." Lin Wanru looked up at him and asked doubtfully, "You have friends in Feng Province?"
"I just met them."
Lee looked at her and said, "I should have mentioned to you before that there is a country called Great Britain that is rich in colored glaze and has no shortage of jewelry. I happened to meet a few foreign businessmen from Great Britain yesterday. I'll help you ask if they have the goods and if they are willing to cooperate with you." Lin Wanru stood up and looked at him. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Lee waved his hand and said, "We're on the same side. It's what I should do." Lin Yong leaned against the door of the shop and took out a milky white lump from the box. He threw it into the air and caught it with his mouth. His eyes wandered, and he wondered what the Queen of Great Britain's 3 palaces and 6 courtyards looked like. On the street, an extremely slovenly old man with worn-out clothes and messy hair took out a small porcelain bottle from his bosom. He poured out a pill from it and threw it into his mouth. His brows instantly furrowed. He hurriedly took out a cloth bag from his arms. When he opened it, he saw that it was empty. His face changed involuntarily. The sloppy old man sighed, and a look of frustration and confusion appeared on his face. He had lost the person and the candy. Although the antidote could last for a long time, if he couldn't find the person, he would still end up the same. It was just a matter of time. Should he continue to search like a headless fly in the Qi Kingdom, or should he return to the Jing Kingdom and wait for news? This was a difficult question. Suddenly, as if he smelled something, he sniffed and quickly turned his head to look in a certain direction. A man was leaning against the door of the shop. He was bored to death, throwing something white into the air and catching it with his mouth. Lin Yong was still absent-mindedly repeating the action just now. However, when he habitually closed his mouth this time, he found that the sweet thing did not fall into his mouth. He actually wasted one. He shook his head in disappointment and threw another one. Still nothing. When he threw the third candy, Lin Yong finally realized something. He lowered his head and saw an extremely sloppy old man standing in front of him. The old man was currently putting a candy into his mouth. Chapter 691. An intoxicated expression appeared on the sloppy old man's face. How could he have such an expression after eating candy? Lin Yong waved his hand angrily and scolded. Where did this beggar come from? Get lost. He had thought that his accuracy had deteriorated due to overwork. He did not expect this old beggar to rob him. He had never seen such a bold beggar. Lin Yong rolled up his sleeves. Fonglan Garden had been attracting beggars for the past 2 days. Many customers had been scared away, and there had been a lot of business. If this old man did not know what was good for him, he was prepared to take some tough measures. The old man nodded in satisfaction with the candy in his mouth. He did not care about what Lin Yong had done. He pointed at the box in his hand and asked, "Where can I buy this?" This kind of milk candy was only sold in the capital of the Jing Kingdom. This was the first time he had seen it anywhere else since he left the capital. What's there to sell? Let's go. Lin Yong waved his hand. He did not want to argue with him about what had happened just now. He thought that there was no point in arguing with a beggar. Instead, it would lower his status. Let's go. Seeing that the old man was unmoved, Lin Yong had just finished speaking when the sloppy old man raised his head and glanced at him. It was this look that made Lin Yong shiver involuntarily. It was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. He felt cold from head to toe. He could not say what he wanted to say no matter what. The old man looked at him and asked again, "Where can I buy this?" Lin Yong said subconsciously, "No, I don't sell it." The sloppy old man frowned. At this moment, a figure walked out of the shop. Li looked at Lin Yong and said, "If you have finished eating, you can go over there and get more. I made a lot this time. 2 people can't finish it." The sloppy old man raised his head and looked at the familiar yet strange young man who had walked out of the shop. His nose suddenly felt a little sour. Suffering from the strange poison, trekking over mountains and rivers, sprinting for thousands of miles, eating and sleeping in the open, experiencing countless hardships to arrive here step by step, and all these hardships had finally vanished into thin air at this moment. Li looked at the beggar with sparkling eyes and sighed. Everyone had their own way of living. There were high and mighty emperors, and there were beggars who lived at the bottom of society. Everyone had different worries. For the former, they might think about how to conquer cities and stabilize the country, but for the latter, they would be moved to tears just by eating a piece of candy. Being able to fill their stomachs and survive was probably their only pursuit. He took out a piece of silver and handed it over, saying, "Take it, go eat something." The old man combed his messy hair to the side and said in a trembling voice, "It's me." Lin Yong was stunned. He looked at Li Yi and then at the old beggar with a puzzled expression. Li's hand was in midair. At that moment, he felt like he had won the lottery. "I took this from home. It's Uncle Lin's clothes. Wear it first." Lin Yong took a piece of clothes and said, "Li brothers, you have such an old servant in your family. Why haven't I heard you mention it before?" Li Yi explained, "At that time, we met mountain bandits and accidentally got separated. It's really fate that we can meet again here. It's not easy." Lin Yong put down the clothes and looked at the sloppy old man who was washing his face. He turned back and whispered, "I'll get something for him to eat." Just now, his eyes were green with hunger. "I'm scared just looking at him." Of course, a guru was terrifying. In such an era, he could even be called a nuclear weapon. His martial arts cultivation had already reached the peak. He could use his own momentum to make ordinary people, or even ordinary masters, directly collapse. Killing with a glance was nothing. The sloppy old man changed into a set of clean clothes and swept his gaze across the courtyard. The 2 people he was looking for were both there. He drank a mouthful of wine and casually threw a piece of candy into his mouth. He only felt that the heavy burden on his shoulders had been lifted in an instant. The task was completed. There was candy and wine. What more could he ask for in life? Li Yi sat beside him and looked at him. He asked, "Why are you here?" "Someone asked me to come here. He asked me to bring you back unscathed." The sloppy old man looked at him and said, "You know, we people in Jianghu pay most attention to the word righteousness. Since I promised him, I must do it." Li thought for a moment and asked again, "What's the situation in Xuzhou now?" "They still don't know that you have come to the Qi kingdom. They have been searching for you. I heard that the king of Shu has even offered a reward of 10,000 taels of silver, vowing to find you." The old man looked at him and asked, "Do you have a good relationship with the king of Shu?" Li waved his hand and said, "Just a little." The old man said, "Then let's go back immediately. When we reach Xuzhou, we don't have to worry about the power of the Taoist nun." Ahem. Li Yi coughed twice and said, "Don't worry. You have fought with the Taoist nun. Aren't you injured? Stay here and recuperate for a while. We will leave after resting for a while." The king of Shu was an idiot. If he had used this kind of perseverance on other things, he would have become the crown prince long ago. He would not have been sent to a remote place like Xuzhou. He weighed the pros and cons carefully. Although there was one more injured grandmaster, a grandmaster could not kill thousands of people. Given his friendship with the king of Shu, it would still be difficult for him to pass through Xuzhou and return safely. "My injury is not a problem. As long as I don't meet a grandmaster, I will be fine." The sloppy old man clapped his hands and said, "You should pack up first and set off early to avoid more trouble." Li stood up, looked at him and said, "You should recuperate first. What if your injury worsens? Your health is the most important. I will find a place for you in the inn next door. You can stay there first. This matter is settled." One could not be too selfish. It was not easy for the old man to travel thousands of miles. He had just had a chance to rest, but he had to torture him again. If he really did this, was he still human? The sloppy old man watched him walk out of the yard. The expression on his old face was a little stunned. After a while, it became a little complicated. In Fonglin Garden, Lin Wanru put down her pen and looked at Li Yi and asked, "How do you plan to settle that old man?" Li Yi said, "Let him stay in the inn next door." It was not easy for the old man to come all the way here. "If there is any difficulty, you can tell me." Lin Wanru nodded, looked up at him, and asked, "The foreign merchants, I've already negotiated with them." Li Yi smiled and said, "They are also in urgent need of money. They have a lot of jewelry which was brought from the Jing kingdom. I can provide them to you directly. The price is negotiable." Lin Wanru thought for a while and said, "If the jewelry has been shaped, I'm afraid the price will not be low." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You don't have to worry about that. I heard from these foreign merchants that their former shopkeeper owed hundreds of thousands of taels of silver for eating, drinking, whoring, and gambling. He ran away with his sister-in-law and didn't even pay them their wages. They were forced to take these jewels and sell them cheaply. The original price of 1,000 taels of silver can now be bought for 300 taels of silver. The price won't be too high, and even your labor fees will be saved." "Really?" Lin Wanru raised her head, and her beautiful eyes lit up. "Really?" Li Yi nodded. If those goods were converted into taels of silver, it would be inconvenient to carry them. Silver notes could only be exchanged in the Qi kingdom. If they wanted to go back, these things would be a burden. So he simply did her a favor. Chapter 692. If that's true, that would be great. Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "It's just that he actually eloped with his wife's sister. That shopkeeper's character is too despicable. It's best not to make wild guesses if you don't know the truth." Li shook his head and said, "Maybe he had no other choice, or maybe he was just wronged or misunderstood." Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Heartless men are not worth discussing. Let's talk about the cooperation with those foreign merchants." "No. How is he heartless? I wonder how much goods they have?" What if he was also forced, isn't this? Is it finished goods or raw materials? The injustice of the owner of the glass shop could not be cleared. Li Yi sighed and explained, they have a lot of goods. The Lin family definitely can't eat them all, and they won't sell all of them to you. The goods are all finished goods. Great Britain is rich in glass, but it lacks other gems and jade. This time, they are using glass to exchange for these things and plan to sell them back home. Lin Wanru was puzzled and asked, if that's the case, why did they cede them to us? Li Yi continued to explain, Great Britain is just a small country. Who would they sell so many gems and jade to? They also want to sell some here first so that they can reduce the pressure when they go back. If they have too many goods and can't sell them, wouldn't that be a loss? Lin Wanru thought about it and looked at him. She reminded him, there's no such thing as a free lunch in this world. I still feel that there's something fishy about this. You have to be careful and don't be fooled by them. Why is this girl so insensitive? Li felt a headache coming on and said, how about this? Those people are still in the city. If there's anything, you can talk to them personally when you have time. Although he wanted to help the Lin family get through this hurdle, some things couldn't be said. Li Yi waved his hand and said, those 4 merchants are staying in the inn next door. I'll ask them to look for you later. As he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, Li Yi suddenly realized something. That night, Lin Wanru accidentally left the paper with a debit and credit bookkeeping method in the Qian family. It was picked up by the god of wealth, but he didn't know whether he understood it or not. Thinking about it carefully, it was just a simple example. The possibility of an ordinary person understanding it was not high. Even if they were really enlightened, it would not cause much of a stir when used for a small-scale audit. What I'm afraid of is that not only does he understand it, but he also becomes patriotic and wants to eliminate the traitors for the country. He wants to return the world to a bright and clear sky. Then, when he presents this method, he happens to meet an upright official who wants to make a great contribution and use it to carry out the anti-corruption work. It's like fighting flies and tigers at the same time. If that was the case, there would be a good show to watch. Although this possibility was indeed pitifully small, if any part of it was missing, it would not have the desired effect. However, there was no show to watch. He wasn't so bored that he had to harm the third prince, Zhao Yi. After all, the third prince had treated him well. If it wasn't for the jade pendant, Mississippi Lu's body would not have recovered so well. If one did too many ungrateful things, there would be retribution. What a pity! Li Yi sighed and walked out of the door of the shop. Today was an extremely ordinary day for the people of Feng Province. Most people were busy making a living as usual. However, some officials in the city could not help but be on tenterhooks. This time, the eldest prince personally led many imperial censors and 500 personal guards to inspect the area on behalf of the emperor. Every time they arrived at a place, they would stay for a few days to listen to the public opinion and inspect the local officials. They had the power to dismiss officials below the 6th rank. If the officials above the 6th rank had committed a serious crime, they could be detained and brought back to the capital. Feng Province was the third prince's fief. Everyone knew about the relationship between the eldest prince and the third prince. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The eldest prince would certainly not let it go easily. The officials of Feng Province had to pray for their own good fortune. Have you all figured out the method? The eldest prince, Zhao Zheng, looked at the imperial censors in a temporary guest house in Feng Province and asked. The imperial censors replied in unison, Your Highness, we have figured it out. Zhao Zheng nodded and said, This time, we have been ordered by His Majesty to supervise the prefectures. We must act in accordance with the law. We must not disappoint His Majesty and the people of Dachi.
Go.
Everyone complied. As they walked out of the guest house, they saw more than 10 figures in front of them. An official who was walking in front of them cupped his fists and said, I have been ordered by the third prince to assist you. Sirs, please. The imperial censors looked at each other and did not know what to do. Suddenly, the eldest prince's voice was heard from behind. Speaking of which, the third imperial brother's people are indeed more familiar with Feng Province. Zhao Zheng walked out and said with a smile, Remember to thank the third imperial brother for me when you go back." After everyone had left, an accompanying official came forward and said with a frown, "Your Highness, the third imperial brother clearly does not trust you." Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Since he is worried, let those people follow. I am only acting on orders. It is good that the officials of Feng Province are safe." They were able to find these people so easily and decisively without any sloppiness. On the second day of his arrival in Feng Province, the Great Prince had already expressed his attitude. Seeing their colleagues, who had been joking with them in the morning, being taken away at this moment, and some of them might not even be able to see them again in the future, everyone had different expressions on their faces. Their hearts were extremely complicated. His Excellency has been taken away. Quickly, send a letter to the capital. It is said that the first prince has a wonderful method that can make all the corrupt officials have nowhere to hide. We need to be vigilant about this. We have to report this to His Excellency quickly. This is extremely urgent. Immediately send this letter to the capital and remind them to be more careful." Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and saw a large group of soldiers escorting a few people on the street. He could not help but sigh and said softly, "The security in Feng Prefecture is really not good." Li Yi was stunned for a moment, then he nodded and said, "It's good to investigate corrupt officials. These corrupt officials only know how to plunder the people's wealth and not let them live a good life. They should have been investigated long ago." Lin Wanru looked at him in a daze and whispered, "Is it that night?" Hey, what night? Girls should pay attention to what you say. It's not good to be heard by others." "I don't know what you're talking about." Li Yi waved his hand and turned to leave. "I have to go back to cook. See you later, Miss Lin." Lin Wanru stood in the same place and flipped through the account books on the table. Her face was filled with doubt, confusion, and all kinds of mixed emotions. When she finally raised her head and looked out of the door, there was no one there. No one could escape. What was to come would come. Maybe all of this was destined. Li Yi hummed a lively tune as he walked into the courtyard. Out of habit, he raised his head to take a look. The window of one of the rooms on the upper floor of the inn was open. That was where the old man surnamed Su was temporarily staying. Grandmaster Li Yi had seen several of them, including Rui, Old Man Chong, Taoist Nun, second granduncle, and the monster Su upstairs. He always thought that grandmasters should have a sage-like appearance. They could destroy strong enemies with a wave of their hands, and then they could leave with a wave of their sleeves, leaving nothing behind. It was the first time he saw a grandmaster who ate White Rabbit creamy candies as if they were rice. Mississippi Lu often did some activities in the courtyard. She was no different from a normal person now, and a dozen normal people were definitely no match for her. Judging from the fact that he was still standing here, it should be some time before Mississippi Lu fully recovered. Li walked into the kitchen and brought out the warm medicine. He walked to the stone table, looked back at Mississippi Lu, and said, "Put down the sword first. It's time to drink the medicine." "Drink." A toast to shopkeeper Su. "Haha, young Master Bai, you're too kind." In a private room of a restaurant in the city, Bai Yu raised his wine cup and looked at the two men opposite him. He smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su, let me give you a toast. Many thanks to the two of you for this matter." "You're welcome, you're welcome." A man with a short beard smiled and said, "Our three families are united, and that's how we got to where we are today. We should help each other for such a small matter." The other man next to him said, "Moreover, if nephew Bai can take down the Lin family, it'll be a good thing for us." The man with the short beard thought about it and said, "I'm afraid that the Lin family will fight us to the death. That'll be troublesome. The Lin family shouldn't be so irrational. Apart from the three of us, they have no other source of goods in the entire Feng province. If they really fight us to the death, their losses will be even greater." That's not necessarily the case. Miss Lin is now in power. Everything related to the Lin family's business is decided by her. You know her temper, and she has many tricks up her sleeve. It's not impossible for her to fight us to the death. Bai cleared his throat and said, "Don't worry, since I'm the one who suggested this, I won't let you suffer. Without the goods, the Lin family won't be able to hold on for long. We just need to wait patiently. Even if something happens, the Bai family will be able to take all the goods from both families." "That's good." The two men smiled and nodded. They raised their wine glasses and said, "Let's drink, let's drink." The door was suddenly pushed open from the outside. A man dressed like a shop assistant walked in and whispered a few words in the short-bearded man's ear. The short-bearded man put down his wine glass and asked, "Really?" The shop assistant nodded vigorously. "He's waiting in the shop right now." The short-bearded man's eyes flashed a few times. He stood up and cupped his hands towards Bai and the other man. He smiled and said, "Brother Su, nephew Bai, something happened in the shop. I'll be taking my leave first." "It's fine." Bai nodded. Seeing him leave in a hurry, the man surnamed Su and Bai looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with doubt. The man surnamed Su glanced at him and asked, "Shall we go take a look?" "Let's go." Bai nodded. The Ma family made a living by selling jade materials. They had a few shops, and although they weren't considered a big business, they could still be considered a wealthy family. They had a bit of a reputation in Feng province. At this moment, shopkeeper Ma hurriedly stepped into the shop. As soon as he entered, he impatiently asked, "Where are the glass materials?" Inside the shop, a few strangely dressed men stood there. One of them was speaking to the shop assistant in a strange manner while gesturing with his hands. On the street, Bai and the man surnamed Su were quickly walking over. Chapter 694. The strangely dressed man casually took out a piece of green, transparent, irregular object and said, "These colored glaze materials are all real. You can inspect them and ask someone to process them. It won't take much effort to make a good colored glazeware. If we weren't in urgent need of silver, we would definitely process them ourselves and not sell them to you." The shop assistant looked at him with a puzzled face and asked, "You didn't speak like that just now." The foreign merchant was stunned and asked, "Then how did I speak like that?" Yes, you spoke like that." The shop assistant twitched his mouth and immediately shut his mouth after saying that. He was worried that if he continued talking to him, he would also speak like that in the future. Shopkeeper Ma didn't pay attention to the conversation between the two. All his attention was on the piece of colored glaze in his hand. After a moment, he withdrew his gaze and took a deep breath, asking, "How much is the piece of colored glaze in your hand worth?" The man weighed the colored glaze in his hand and said, 3,000 taels. 3,000 taels? Shopkeeper Ma smiled and said, "If it's a real piece of colored glazeware, 3,000 taels isn't expensive. But this is just a raw material. How can it be worth 3,000 taels? You're in this line of business, so you should know that it doesn't cost much to make a piece of colored glazeware." The foreign merchant opened his mouth and paused. He looked at the shop assistant next to him and said, "The important thing is the raw material. 3,000 taels isn't expensive. I'm in the raw material business, so I naturally know the rules of this line of business." Boss Ma smiled and said, "It's risky to carve the raw materials into jewelry. How about 2,000 taels of silver? We have a lot of colored glaze and wanted to find someone who is worth cooperating with." The man shook his head, took the colored glaze in his hand, and turned to leave. When he walked to the door, he turned back and said, "Since you're not sincere, we'll find someone else." At the door, a middle-aged man stopped him and said with a smile, Wait. Our Su family is also in this line of business. 3,000 taels it is. The price is negotiable. Can I have a look at this piece of colored glaze first?" Shopkeeper Ma quickly walked out and happened to see the middle-aged man holding the piece of glass and looking it up and down. His heart sank and he immediately stepped forward and said, "Brother Su, how could you do something like stealing business? Don't you know the rules?" The man looked up at him and said with a smile, "Brother Ma, what are you talking about? This is obviously a business that you don't want to do. Don't tell me you don't want others to do it? What business do you mean I won't do? Aren't I discussing it now?" Shopkeeper Ma walked over with a face full of smiles as he stopped in front of the foreign merchant and said, "Come, come, come. Brother, I was in the wrong just now. Come in and have a cup of tea, we can talk about it slowly." The man surnamed Su said, "All right, I'm thirsty. Let's talk inside." Shopkeeper Ma looked back and said, "What do you mean? Let's talk inside. I'm discussing business with this brother. What are you doing here?" The man surnamed Su said with a sullen face, "Brother Ma, this is a bit too much. Can your Ma family handle such a big business?" The young man surnamed Bai immediately stepped forward to smooth things over. "Shopkeepers, we've been friends for so many years. Let's not hurt each other because of such a small matter." Shopkeeper Su, Shopkeeper Ma accepted this business first. "Why don't we let them talk first? There must be some rules, right?" After saying that, he looked at the foreign merchant and asked, "You just said that you have a lot of glass? This damn Su family and Ma family. We've been working together for so many years. How can they raise the price just like that? What a despicable person." In the courtyard, Lin Yong was squatting on the ground, snorting as he ate the noodles and complained angrily. Li Yi used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing the medicine for Lady Lu. Merchants only pursue profit. Don't take friendship seriously. Money is their true friend. Don't think that the three of them are in the same boat now. If there is a conflict of interest, they will turn hostile faster than anyone else, said Li Yi casually as he used a small fan to fan the fire while brewing medicine for Lady Lu. Lin Yong interrupted, "My lady is not like that." All right, I know your lady is a good person. Kindness will be rewarded. It's not that she won't repay her kindness, but it's not time yet." Li Yi added more firewood to the pot and said, "You don't have to be too angry. No matter what you do, you have to have a bottom line. Otherwise, you'll suffer retribution. Those who cheat others will be cheated. This has been the truth since ancient times. Maybe those families will soon suffer retribution." Lin Yong snorted and finished eating the noodles. He put down the bowl and said gloomily, "Why haven't I seen evil get retribution? Good people don't live long, but scourges last for thousands of years. In this world, evil people live more freely." Li saw that a window of a room in the inn next door was opened. He stood up and handed the fan to Lin Yong. He patted him on the shoulder and said, "Believe me, there will always be retribution. It's just a matter of time. I'll go out for a while. Help me watch the fire for a while." Lin Yong squatted down and fanned the fire from time to time. Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and walked into the inn next door. He went straight up to the second floor and knocked on a door 3 times. After 3 knocks, the door opened. In the shop in front, a shop assistant scratched his head in confusion and mumbled, "Foreigners all talk like this." Chapter 695. The city of Feng Province was in a mess these days. Every day, officers and soldiers could be seen arresting people and passing through the streets. Not only the officials of Feng Province were in a panic, but also the common people were affected. There were fewer pedestrians on the streets than usual. Some officers and soldiers passed by just now. I wonder who was arrested this time. I heard that it was the district magistrate of the neighboring county. He embezzled a lot of money, and people's lives were involved. He deserved it. This is the end of corrupt officials. Who knows? The first prince brought people to Feng Province to make trouble. Obviously, he is targeting the third prince. Maybe it was them. Sure.
How dare you say that?
Aren't you afraid of losing your head? Second Miss Lu wanted to drink fish soup today. In order to pick out fresh fish, Li woke up early and went to the market. He carried a fish in his hand. When he walked on the street, he heard many similar words. The situation of the royal family of the Qi kingdom was different from that of the Jing kingdom. Few sons of the emperor of the Jing kingdom were successful. But the emperor of the Qi kingdom was different. He had several princes. Although they were not outstanding, they had their own talents. Among them, the third prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Yi, was the best. At such a young age, he had done many great things that were praised by the officials and the emperor. In more than 10 years, he developed the barren Feng province into an important city of the country. He was surrounded by countless talents and enjoyed a high prestige among the people. He was also an outstanding figure of the younger generation, a real master of both literature and martial arts. Because of this, the third prince, Zhao Yi, enjoyed a high prestige among the people of the Qi kingdom. Many officials in the court thought highly of him and thought that he was the best candidate to inherit the throne in the future. In some things, the Qi kingdom was different from the Jing kingdom and the surrounding countries. Nominally, the eldest son of the legal wife inherited the throne. But since the establishment of the Qi kingdom, there were not many princes who really inherited the throne. Because the eldest son of the legal wife was incompetent, he was replaced by a more outstanding prince. Such things happened frequently in the history of the Qi kingdom. Even the officials and citizens of the Qi kingdom had formed a mindset of, if you can do it, you can do it. If you can't, there's someone else. Not to mention that he was only the eldest son of the legitimate wife for the time being. Even if he had already become the crown prince, they would not be able to relax until the last moment of the former emperor's life. The first prince of the Qi kingdom must be feeling a lot of pressure, especially when he had a younger brother who was more outstanding than him in every aspect and was even more handsome than him. That was why he had worked so hard this time. In just a few days, the storm had spread from Fengzhou City to the surrounding counties and even to further places. In any case, the surrounding prefectures could be considered as the third prince's sphere of influence. He would rather kill the wrong person than let him go. Over the past few days, Li Yi had learned quite a lot about the Qi kingdom. To a certain extent, the first prince of the Qi kingdom was also a pitiful person. If he had been born in the Jing kingdom, he would not have needed to compete with so many people. The throne would have been easy and stable. As long as he was not like the king of Shu, who was determined to seek death from the capital city to Suzhou, he would have inherited the throne without any suspense. It would have been better if he had stayed in the capital and enjoyed a comfortable life. He would not have been like what he was doing now, running all over the country with a group of imperial censors just to increase his chances of seizing power. If he was not careful, he might even offend a lot of people. Why bother? Li Yi sighed and picked up the fish to have a look.
It was still alive.
If it was dead, the soup would not be fresh. When he walked to the gate of Fonglin Garden, Lin Yong walked in from outside. When he saw him, he was startled and immediately walked up to him. He said, "Just in time. Miss wants to see you.
Come in with me."
"What's the matter?" Li Yi stopped and asked. Lin Yong pulled his arm and said, "The Ma family and the Su family are here. They seem to want to discuss something." "Oh, it's too late. Let's go there first." Li Yi handed the fish to him and said, "I'll go there myself. Help me put this fish into the tank. I'm going to make soup tonight. Don't kill it." Lin Yong nodded and said, "Okay. What time tonight?" "I'll go there after I finish my work in the shop." Wanru, we were indeed in the wrong in the previous matter. Shopkeeper Ma sat in his seat and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He said apologetically, "It's just that the market has changed recently. If we don't raise the price, we'll lose money. I hope you won't blame us." Shopkeeper Su hurriedly said, "That's right. We've been working together for so many years. When the Lin family was still in your grandfather's hands, they bought from us. It's not worthwhile to hurt our relationship because of such a small matter. Don't you think so?" Lin Wanru looked at the two of them and asked, "Why don't the two of you get straight to the point? Why are you here today?" "It's about the goods. We've thought it through." Shopkeeper Ma stood up and looked at her. He said, "How about we trade according to the price we discussed before?" Shopkeeper Su nodded and said, "Yes, yes. We'll trade according to the price we discussed at the beginning. After we went back, we thought about it. This matter was indeed our fault. We've been friends for so many years. Even if we lose a little money, we can't let you suffer a loss." Lin Wanru looked at the two of them. Her expression was calm, but there was a trace of surprise in her eyes. Before today, the Ma family and the Su family insisted on the price and were unwilling to budge. Why did they suddenly change their minds? They were so anxious to sell that batch of goods to the Lin family. Could it be that there was something wrong with that batch of goods? The two of you can go back first. I'll think about this matter. Lin Wanru thought for a moment and looked at the two of them. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's expressions changed slightly. What was there to think about? They were going to trade with those foreign merchants tomorrow. If they couldn't sell that batch of goods, they wouldn't be able to gather enough money. At that time, wouldn't that deal with a sure profit and no loss be ruined? Shopkeeper Ma said in a hurried tone. Wanru, what else is there to think about? Let's go according to the original price. Miss Lin, why are you looking for me? Li stood at the door and looked at Lin Wanru. Shopkeeper Ma's words were interrupted. He looked at her with a dissatisfied expression. Lin Wanru stood up and said, Come in first. In the past, she did things swiftly and decisively. She wouldn't be influenced by outsiders when she did business. However, she didn't know when she started to care more about the opinions of the people in front of her. Although the other party was just a scholar, he could always give her a lot of inspiration when he talked about business. Time would always prove that his ideas were right. Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and asked Lin Wanru tentatively, Wanru, this is the Lin family's accountant. Li looked at him and said, Please wait here for a moment. Lin Wanru said to the two of them first. After nodding slightly at Li Yi, she turned and walked into the inner room. Li Yi slowly followed her. The Ma family and the Su family are going to cooperate with the Lin family again? Li Yi asked. They said that they are willing to trade for the raw materials at the price we discussed before. Lin Wanru nodded and said, They didn't back down at all yesterday. Today they are so attentive. I don't know what they are planning. Li looked at her and asked, Haven't you bought a lot of things from the foreign merchants? Can you still eat those goods? It's a bit difficult. Lin Wanru shook her head and said, But with those goods, the Lin family won't have to rely on these three families for a few years. It's an opportunity. Li thought for a moment and said, Then let's go. Seeing the two of them coming out, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su immediately went to greet them. Shopkeeper Su asked eagerly, Wanru, have you thought about it? Li Yi smiled and walked forward. He said, The Lin family, the Ma family, and the Su family have been cooperating for so many years. Do you still need to think about this? The two of them looked at the young man in front of them and were stunned. Since when did the affairs of the Lin family become decided by an accountant? However, seeing that Lin Wanru didn't move, Shopkeeper Ma seemed to have realized something. He smiled and said, That's good. That's good. Then the price will be according to, the price is not a problem as long as it's cheap. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Sit down and talk. If they could not get the silver today, they would not be able to complete the transaction with the foreign merchants tomorrow. They would have to watch a lot of silver slip away in front of their eyes. The loss would be immeasurable. Shopkeeper Ma stood up and sighed. The Ma family and the Su family have always advanced and retreated together. In that case, we have disturbed you today. Brother Su, let's go.
Goodbye.
Shopkeeper Su also stood up immediately. The two of them casually cupped their hands and turned to leave. Lin Wanru came over and looked out the door. She said, They have left. Li Yi took another sip of tea and said, They will be back soon. Are you sure? Lin Wanru raised her eyebrows. Li Yi smiled and said, Wait and see. Although they called each other Brother Ma and Brother Su affectionately, it was just a fake brotherly relationship. When it came to the interests of each family, even blood brothers would turn against each other. The two families were currently short of money. Otherwise, they would not have come over to beg the Lin family to buy the goods. Now it was just a matter of who could not endure it first. The taste of the tea today is really different. It doesn't seem to be because of the water. Li picked up the teacup and looked at her. Lin Wanru pointed to the teacup on the table and said, This is red date and wolfberry tea, and this is my teacup. Li Yi was startled. He lifted the lid of the teacup and looked at it again. He slowly put down the teacup. The atmosphere in the room was a little awkward. Haha, red date and wolfberry tea is good. Red dates can nourish the body, nourish the blood, and calm the nerves. Wolfberry nourishes the liver and eyesight. Drinking more of this tea can also improve anemia caused by menstruation. Cough. In short, drinking more is good. Li coughed twice and stood up from the chair. He cupped his hands towards the door and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, please come in." Seeing Shopkeeper Ma walk in again, a trace of surprise finally appeared on Lin Wanru's face. A smile appeared on Shopkeeper Ma's face and he said, "Haha, Miss Lin, I thought about it. We can still talk about that batch of goods again." Lin Wanru looked at Li. Li took a step forward with a troubled expression on his face and said, "Shopkeeper Ma, to be honest, our Lin family does not lack jade materials this time. Instead, we are more interested in the Su family's gemstones. So, Shopkeeper Ma, I can only apologize." Shopkeeper Ma was startled. His expression suddenly changed and he immediately said, "Miss Lin, think about it again. Recently, the market for jade has been very good. There is no harm in hoarding more goods." Li shook his head and said, "I'm sorry, Shopkeeper Ma. We still think 90%. Shopkeeper Ma looked at them and said, "I'll lower the price to 90%. 90% of the market price is fine." This time, the amount of lioli was huge. He calculated the family's surplus money and scraped together some from here and there, but it was still far from enough. The value of this batch of goods was not small. It could be said that this batch of goods was his last hope. Li frowned and shook his head. "This is really not a problem of money." Shopkeeper Ma clenched his teeth and said with a trembling voice, "Give me another 5%. Can you give me another 5%? Money is really not important." Shopkeeper Ma's eyes were already filled with tears. He clenched his teeth and said, 80%. 80%. I can't go any lower. Go outside and ask around. There is no such price anywhere." Lin Wanru looked at Shopkeeper Ma. She had been dealing with him for many years, but this was the first time she saw such an expression on his face. When she turned to look at Li Yi, the expression on her pretty face became somewhat complicated. What confidence did he have to be able to force Shopkeeper Ma to this state? "Humph, you said there is no such price anywhere." A cold snort came from outside the door. Shopkeeper Su strode in and said coldly, "My Su family is willing to give you another 5% on top of the 80%. Surnamed Su, what is the meaning of this? Surnamed Ma, what is the meaning of sneaking back here? Aren't you?" Li looked at Lin Wanru and shrugged slightly. He was very pleased with his prediction. Lin Wanru glanced at him and sat down on a chair to the side. She took a sip of tea and looked at the two quarreling men in the hall. She sighed. At this moment, she actually felt some sympathy for them. Suddenly, as if she had thought of something, she slowly turned her head and looked at the teacup in her hand. The expression on her pretty face froze, and she didn't even swallow the tea in her mouth. "You two, calm down. Calm down." The atmosphere between the two people gradually became white-hot. When one of them was already looking at the chairs in the hall, Li knew that he couldn't let them continue arguing like this. "We are all doing business together. We see each other all the time. Don't hurt the harmony between us." He walked in between the two people and separated them. He said, "Isn't it because of the problem of the goods? I have a way to get the goods of both families to sell." "What way?" The two people immediately looked at him. "How about we sell the goods of both families at 50% of the market price?" Li looked at them and encouraged, "This way, the Lin family will be able to buy all the goods of both families." Pooh! Lin Wanru's body leaned forward slightly. She almost spat out the mouthful of tea that she didn't know whether she had swallowed it or spat it out. When she saw Li looking at her, she awkwardly covered her face with her sleeves and secretly wiped away the water at the corner of her mouth. When she raised her head, the expression on her face froze. She had finally swallowed that mouthful of tea in a panic. At this time, Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su finally recovered from the shock of that sentence. 50%? Why don't you just rob a bank? Shopkeeper Ma was the first to jump up and down. Shopkeeper Su quickly said, "Do you know what you were saying? 50%? How are we going to make a profit?" Our Lin family is also in this business. Li looked at the two of them and said, everyone knows how much profit there is in this business. You can still make a profit from 50%. As humans, don't be too greedy. That's for you. Shopkeeper Ma looked at him and said angrily, Brother Su, let's go. Shopkeeper Su's expression changed. He clenched his fists in his sleeves and finally relaxed them. He closed his eyes and said slowly, Brother Ma, you go back first. I want to have a good talk with this greedy young man. Chapter 697. You. Shopkeeper Ma stood rooted to the ground and looked at Shopkeeper Su in astonishment. You'll do it even if it's 50%? Shopkeeper Su stared into his eyes as if he could see through his thoughts. Are you not going to do it? Shopkeeper Ma's expression became a little unnatural after being seen through. He said in a low voice, 50%? I won't be earning much. It doesn't matter. Even if we can't do business, we can still be friends. Seeing Lin Yong looking around outside, Li waved at him and said, Brother Lin, come and send Shopkeeper Ma off. Shopkeeper Ma clenched his fists and loosened them. A dry smile quickly appeared on his face as he said, Don't worry, don't worry. Everything can be discussed. Without the Lin family, this batch of goods could not be disposed of in a short period of time. The business with the foreign merchants would also be ruined. That young man was right. If they sold the goods at half price, they would not suffer a loss. However, the profit would be pitifully small. Of course, if they rejected the Lin family, they would eventually make a move. However, they could not afford to wait any longer. The profit from this batch of goods was a small matter. Liuli was a big deal. They could not lose the big picture for the small. They had learned this principle decades ago. At this moment, while the two of them were feeling gloomy, they could not help but feel resentment towards the Bai family. If not for Bai Yu's persuasion, they would not have suddenly made things difficult for the Lin family, and they would not be in this situation today. Shopkeeper Ma turned to look at Lin Wanru. There was a hint of pleading in his voice. Wanru, 50% is too little. We've worked for nothing these days. Why don't we add another 10%? Lin Wanru raised her head to look at Li Yi. She stood up from her chair, but did not reply. Shopkeeper Ma closed his eyes and said anxiously, 5%. Even 5% is fine. After the two shopkeepers left, Lin Wanru's strange gaze made Li Yi feel a little guilty. He looked away and said, You don't know, but I'm actually very good at bargaining. Lin Wanru finally opened her mouth and asked, Why do they still agree when we lower the price to such a low level? Li Yi shook his head and said, How would I know? Maybe they found their conscience and felt guilty to the Lin family, so they wanted to make up for it and seek peace of mind. I heard that some people have some special hobbies. The more they lose in business, the more peace of mind they feel. The way Lin Wanru looked at him now was completely different from before. The final transaction price with the Ma family and the Su family was 55% of the market price, which was already an incredibly low price, exactly half of the price they offered 2 days ago. This was simply unimaginable in the past. It could even be said that the Lin family got a bargain for nothing. Lin Wanru looked at Li Yi again. It seemed that since he came here, the opportunities for the Lin family to get a bargain for nothing had increased. Seeing that her eyes had been circling around him, Li felt uncomfortable all over. He stood up and said, If there's nothing else, I'll leave first. There's still a fish to deal with at home. Lin Wanru finally withdrew her gaze, stood up and said, Thank you for today's matter. It's just helping to haggle. It's a small matter. I'm leaving. Li Yi waved his hand and walked out of the door. Watching him walk out, Lin Wanru sat down again and stared blankly at the teacup on the table. She had been in charge of the Lin family for a few years and encountered many things in business. She had also accumulated some experience and means, but all the means were generally in line with the norm. Today, her horizons had been truly broadened. She had seen very clearly that when Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su had left, their eyes were glistening with tears. Every time this happened, she would start to wonder who the people she had picked up back then were. Shopkeeper Ma and Shopkeeper Su's decisiveness had actually slightly exceeded Li Yi's expectations. He had thought that it would be good enough if they could lower the price to 70%, but it seemed that he had underestimated the importance they placed on the deal tomorrow. A large batch of azure glass was going to be shipped to the Qi Kingdom. This time, they were destined to suffer a loss. He felt a little guilty for setting them up twice in a row. When he walked out of Fragrant Forest Park, he was surprised to find that the two men had not left yet. The young man named Baiyu was also at the entrance of Fragrant Forest Park. He must have bumped into the two men when he was about to enter. Shopkeeper Ma, Shopkeeper Su. Baiyu was about to greet the two men, but they merely glanced at him coldly and walked straight past him. If not for Baiyu, they would not have suffered such a huge loss this time. They had accumulated a bellyful of anger earlier, so naturally, they would not be in a good mood when they saw him again. Baiyu looked at them suspiciously. The two of you, you're going to look for Miss Lin again? Shopkeeper Ma glanced at Baiyu and sneered. Nephew Bai, I'm afraid you're going to waste your efforts this time. You've been so attentive so many times, but in the end, haven't you ended up benefiting a pretty boy? Shopkeeper Su shook his head. Brother Ma, how can you say that? Nephew Bai doesn't know about this yet. Don't stab him in the chest again. Baiyu's expression changed. What do you mean? What do you mean by cheap pretty boy? This time, the two men merely glanced at him mockingly before turning to leave, leaving Baiyu standing where he was. His expression began to fluctuate. Li Yi walked past him. He glanced at the two men's backs and curled his lips. What kind of people were they? Chapter 698. The box of gold was very conspicuous in the room. It was not that Li Yi had never seen so much money, but he had only seen such a scene of a whole box of gold in front of him in a TV series. When they were most short of money and manpower, they could only rely on selling jade pendants and poems to barely make a living. It was such a difficult period of time. It was only a month, but with so much money in front of them, their hearts were already calm. If it was someone else who saw so much gold, they would immediately become a nouveau riche. They would not be happy if they did not go out and spend hundreds of taels of silver. He closed the box and put it under the bed. When he walked out, he saw the second young lady of the Liu family slowly practicing Tai Chi in the courtyard. This was the improved version of Rui's Tai Chi. It focused more on actual combat, and the movements looked more beautiful. Get ready, we'll go out in a while. Li looked at her and said, What are we going to do? Mississippi Liu continued her movements and asked without turning her head. We've earned so much money. How can we not buy something to splurge on? Why don't we spend at least 1,000 taels of silver? Li urged, Hurry up, we'll leave after we finish eating. No matter in the past, present, or future, women couldn't resist the temptation of shopping. Even a fairy like Second Miss Liu, who didn't eat the food of the mortal world, would occasionally like to go shopping, even if she only bought a bunch of useless things. After finalizing the plan for today, when Li Yi was busy in the kitchen, Lin Yong came over, leaned on the door, and asked, Li brothers, do you have anything to do after dinner? Li did not turn around and said, I'm going out to buy something after dinner. Lin Yong clapped his hands and said, Miss is going out in a while. She asked me to ask you guys if you want to go out together? Since Lin Wanru refused to pay him the last time, he would always do something intentionally or unintentionally. For example, he would give Mississippi Liu a hairpin, a bracelet, or when he passed by a clothing store and saw a beautiful dress, he would also buy it for her, like a disguised compensation. This kind of thing happened every few days, and Li Yi was used to it. Okay. Li Yi only hesitated for a moment and nodded in agreement. For such a long time, Second Miss Liu had been staying at home to recuperate. Occasionally, she would go out with him. Other than him, the only other person she came into contact with was Lin Wanru, who would occasionally come to talk to him. Li noticed that Lin Wanru did not seem to have many friends. Every day, she would go to the Lin family and go to the shop. These two women did not like to talk, but during this time, they actually established a strange relationship. Of course, although they did not like to talk, there were different levels. When he was with Mississippi Liu, Lin Wanru talked more. Chapter 699. I'm asking for your opinion on this matter, not where you stand, nor am I asking if you're enjoying the commotion. Zheng Yuanliang had been assigned to the Imperial Censorate a few years ago to oversee the military, economy, and production in Foam Province and neighboring provinces. He would report to the capital every 6 months. Foam Province was governed by the third prince. The people lived in peace, and the politics were clean. Although there were occasional crimes committed, they were almost negligible. These crimes were unavoidable even in the capital. Other than assigning the censors to various places, the Imperial Censorate would also conduct a large-scale operation every year. They would send out a large number of censors to patrol the provinces and counties. They were responsible for investigating and impeaching officials. This large-scale operation by the Imperial Censorate was normal, but it was also abnormal. This was because there had never been a time when so many officials had failed in the examination of any province. The severity of the examination was so severe that even the censor, who could not bear to offend anyone, could not stand it. Because of this matter, Foam Province and the neighboring provinces were in a state of chaos. The officials were in a state of panic, and they were not in the mood for official business. Naturally, there would be some chaos among the people. This made him wonder if the first prince was using this opportunity to take revenge on a personal grudge and deliberately drag Foam Province into this mess. Based on his relationship with the third prince and his position, it was not strange at all that he would do such a thing. If this was really the case, he could not just stand by and watch. Of course, before that, he had to fully understand the public opinion. He had almost walked through the entire street, and everything was going smoothly until he met this young man who interrupted his train of thought. Opinion? Li looked at him and said, I'm just a commoner. How dare I discuss the affairs of the state? Zheng Yuanliang frowned and looked at him. The affairs of the state are closely related to everyone. Whether you're in the court or in the marketplace, what's the difference? As an ordinary citizen of the Qi Kingdom, I'm just asking for your opinion on this matter. Ordinary citizen? Don't joke around. How can an official be the same as an ordinary citizen? Li looked left and right, then looked at him and asked, Where are your people hiding? Are you going to arrest me as soon as I speak? Let me tell you, I won't fall for such a clumsy trap. The censor stared blankly at the young man in front of him. He opened his mouth but was speechless. After a long time, he spoke again. The government has to act according to the law when arresting people. When have they ever used such a ridiculous reason? Chapter 700. In many cases, a beauty could be equated with a source of calamity. On the streets of the 21st century, ordinary people couldn't help but take a few more glances when encountering a beautiful woman. They would be bold and shameless enough to approach her and ask for her WeChat number. If they took a liking to each other, they would go further. This was a very normal thing. This kind of thing had been like this since ancient times. As time went on, some aspects would become more and more advanced, while others would regress. In the conservative ancient times, this kind of thing was much more open than it was in the future. Ordinary people could only take a few more glances when they saw a beautiful woman, but rich and powerful young masters wouldn't spend a lot of time to pick up girls. They would just snatch them if they didn't agree. Otherwise, where did the classic scenes in dramas and novels come from? From a philosophical point of view, any consciousness was essentially a reflection of objective existence. It could be found in reality and couldn't be created out of thin air. Zhen Guanxi forcefully married Jean Suilian. Gaoya forcefully snatched Lady Lin. In the water margin alone, there were more than 10 cases of women being forcefully snatched. Art came from life, but was higher than life. When Mr. Shi wrote these stories, he didn't create them out of thin air. Being in a foreign country, Li Yi didn't want to cause trouble. However, seeing such a playboy touching Lin Wanru, he couldn't pretend that he didn't see it and act like he didn't. There was no need to be afraid at all. Sue's head was standing at the door. Was there a need to be afraid? I said that I hate men touching my shoulders the most. The smile on the young man's face disappeared. He took 2 steps back and ordered the men, "Break both of his hands. I'll see who dares." Lin Yong roared and stood in front of Li Yi. The men who looked like guards walked over to them. The woman in the shop had long run out in fear, but it attracted the pedestrians on the street to stop and watch. The 2 young men strolled on the street. If one were to observe carefully, they would notice that the people around them would look around vigilantly from time to time, forming an airtight encirclement around the 2 of them. Zhao Zheng looked around and said, "Brother, these censors have been stirring up trouble in Feng province recently. You won't blame me, right?" Zhao Yi shook his head and said, "This is the duty of the imperial censors. Imperial brother worries too much." As the 2 of them walked along, they saw some chaos among the commoners. Zhao Zheng was very pleased with himself, but when he turned his head, he saw that Zhao Yi's face was expressionless. There was a hint of anger, but it was gone in a flash. "My heart is comforted that royal younger brother understands." Zhao Zheng nodded his head and said, "Imperial brother has good intentions." Who would have thought that the rumored first prince would actually be such a sensible person? About 10 steps away, the first prince of the Qi kingdom, Zhao Zheng, and the young man were a few steps behind Zhao Yi. Zhao Zheng looked at him and said in a low voice, "After I'm done with my business, I'll make arrangements for you. When that time comes, you can do whatever you want with those 2 women. These days are special, so you'd better know your place." "I understand." Although the young man's eyes were filled with reluctance, he still lowered his head and said. Li Yi turned his head and pointed in a certain direction. He asked the slovenly old man, "What did he say?" "I didn't hear him clearly." Sue looked at him strangely, then turned to look at Lin Wanru and Mississippi Lu. He peeled a white rabbit creamy candy and popped it into his mouth. Chapter 702.
Who are you?
How did you get in here? Zhao Zheng asked coldly as he slowly moved towards the door, a look of extreme vigilance on his face. There were 500 guards outside the relay station, and all around the room were his personal guards. He really could not figure out how this old man managed to break through the guards and get in here. The masked old man swung his hand, and the chopsticks in his hand shot out. They brushed past Zhao Zheng's eyes and sank deep into the doorframe. He looked at this prince of the Qi kingdom and said, "Don't worry, I won't hurt you." Looking at the 2 easily broken jade chopsticks, which were inserted about an inch above the doorframe, Zhao Zheng knew that it was no longer important how the other party managed to get into this courtyard under the heavy guards. What was important was that if the jade chopsticks could be inserted into the doorframe, they could naturally be inserted into Zhao Zheng's head, heart, or any other place. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, they had regained their indifference. He walked over and cupped his hands towards the masked old man, saying, "I was impolite just now. May I know what senior has come to visit me in the middle of the night?" Since the other party had such terrifying strength, but did not kill him immediately, it meant that the old man was not here to kill him. In that case, everything could be discussed. The masked old man took a sip of wine, then looked at him and asked, "I heard that you've obtained a wonderful method these days, and you're using that method to investigate cases and catch corrupt officials?" Zhao Zheng raised his eyebrows. For a moment, he did not know the old man's true intentions. Was there someone on the list that he cared about, or was it because this matter had touched upon some of his interests? He looked at the old man and said tentatively, "If this matter has offended Senior, I apologize to Senior. If Senior has any requests, Zhao Zheng will certainly do his best to satisfy them." Smack! The masked old man suddenly slammed the table, making a crisp sound. It also made Zhao Zheng's heart tighten. The masked old man raised his eyebrows, looked at him, and said coldly, Do you know that the method is called the debit bookkeeping method, which is a secret that my sect has spent 30 years to develop? But it was stolen by a traitor. When I chased after the traitor, I found that this thing was actually obtained by you. Tell me, where did you get this method? Hearing this, Zhao Zheng was stunned for a moment, and then he immediately realized something. As expected, the god of wealth was just a lowly merchant. How could he come up with such a wonderful method? He must have gotten it from somewhere, taken it for himself, and then claimed credit in front of him. How could such a clumsy method be hidden from him? Zhao Zheng seemed to have seen through everything. Although he did not know which sect this old man belonged to, the person who could research this method must not be ordinary. Maybe there was something more powerful in it. If he could get it. The masked old man said in a deep voice, "This is the complete debit and credit bookkeeping method, as well as a wonderful way to govern the country and fill the national treasury. You must take good care of it and remember not to spread it. If other countries get it, the consequences will be unimaginable." Zhao Zheng was delighted, but a solemn expression appeared on his face. He nodded and said, "Senior, don't worry. After looking at it, I will completely burn it without leaving a trace." The old man nodded and asked, "Now tell me, where did you get this method?" Zhao Zheng replied without hesitation, "Fortune god of money, the fortune god of money in Fengzhou. This method was given by him." Fortune god of money. The masked old man nodded and said, "The thing has been delivered. I will leave now. I hope you won't let me down." Zhao Zheng hurriedly said, "I still don't know your name, Senior. You have done a great service to the Qi Kingdom. Please leave your name. In the future, Zhao Zheng will write a book and erect a monument for you so that the people can admire you." "Haha, I have done my best for the country. How can I, Su Tian, be a vulgar person who does good deeds and leaves my name everywhere?" The old man laughed and said, "Farewell. We will never meet again." He waved his sleeves, and the door opened. Zhao Zheng blinked, but there was no one at the door. Zhao Zheng walked out quickly. A guard immediately came over and bowed. "Your Highness, what can I do for you?" Zhao Zheng looked at them and asked, "Did you see anyone leave my room?" The two guards looked at each other and shook their heads. They said, "No, only your Highness." "All right, there is nothing else. You can leave. In a quarter of an hour, tell the guard in charge of the relay station to see me." Zhao Zheng waved at them and went back to his room. When he walked inside, he saw an item wrapped in black cloth on the table. There was an unconcealable fire in his eyes. After sorting out his thoughts, he couldn't help but feel high-spirited. A master, who was so skilled in martial arts, came to visit in the middle of the night just to pass on this wonderful method to him. Among the many princes of the Qi Kingdom, who else had the same treatment as him? A master was indeed a master. His ability to discern the pearls was something that ordinary people could never hope to achieve in their entire lives. "Your Highness is brilliant. If this method is really implemented in the future, Your Highness will take credit for it." When several censors in the crowd were flattering him, Zhao Zheng waved his hand and said, "Other than that, I have another matter to discuss with you." "Your Highness, please speak your mind. I'm all ears." Zhao Zheng thought for a moment and said, "Recently, I've been supervising the various prefectures. I've obtained the secret method of borrowing money from Feng Province. I've investigated the accounts of the various prefectures and have made great gains. I've arrested 53 officials. However, the number of corrupt officials among them is different, so we can't punish all of them. Those who have committed minor crimes don't need to be demoted or punished. They can be ordered to pay money to pay for their crimes, and the money will be returned to the national treasury and the palace. What do you think?" The crowd of censors raised their heads to look at him, and their faces were filled with shock. Paying for a crime with money was something that had never happened before. It only took a little thought to know that it involved a lot of things, and it couldn't be spoken carelessly. "Your Highness, I think that this method must not be used." One of the censors thought for a moment and said through gritted teeth, "This method goes against the law and will cause the country's laws to collapse. We must not." As censors, they were instinctively sensitive to certain things. They instinctively felt that this was not appropriate. "I'm afraid that Censor Wei is exaggerating." Zhao Zhen glanced at him and said, "In recent years, the national treasury has been empty and the inner government is short of money. We can only do what we want now. Although this method has a certain amount of risk as long as we control it well, it is a wonderful method that can fill up the national treasury. Does Imperial Censor Wei have a better method?" "I know." Censor Wei opened his mouth, looked at him, and immediately retreated without saying another word. The Daki kingdom had been at war for many years, and the national treasury had long been overwhelmed. This had been a headache for the emperor and the court officials, and it had never been solved. It could be foreseen that if this method was implemented, the national treasury would expand at a terrifying speed, and there would be no more worries about a lack of silver. Moreover, this method was very suitable for the current situation. The censors were supervising the prefectures and assessing the officials. Some officials were corrupt, some were ineffective, and some had flaws in their style of work. There would always be some small problems in all aspects, but they were harmless and difficult to measure. If they weren't punished, it would be conniving, and they didn't know how to punish them. If they could all be converted into silver, it would be much more convenient. However, if this was the case, wouldn't it make some officials fearless and worsen their corruption? This was like walking on a steel cable, and below it was a cliff tens of thousands of feet high. If they could safely walk over, they would be greeted with cheers, but if there was the slightest mistake, they would be consigned to eternal damnation, and their bones would be crushed. Before this, there had never been a dynasty that had implemented such a method. Whether it would be applauded or crushed, they could only try it themselves. One of the censors thought about it, and a conflicted expression appeared on his face. He stood up and said, "Your Highness." Zhao Zhen looked at him coldly and asked, "Censor Shin, do you have any objections?" Seeing the great prince's expression, everyone's heart shook. They knew that this time, the great prince had most likely hardened his heart to implement this method. The problem of the national treasury had always been the emperor's sore point. If there was a way to solve this problem once and for all, there would be no more worries. Even if they had to pay a small price, they believed that the emperor would not refuse. For the great prince, this was also a rare opportunity. Once he could personally take charge of this matter, in the future, all the officials in the world would have to act according to his wishes. On one hand, he could receive the emperor's attention, and on the other, he could establish his prestige in front of the officials. If someone disagreed with him on this matter, the outcome would be very tragic. Censor Shin opened his mouth and swallowed the words he was about to say. He bowed and said, "Your Highness is wise." One of the censors asked, "Your Highness, does this method have a name?" Zhao Zhen thought about it and said, "Let's call it silver for discussing crimes." Inside the room, Li looked at the old bedsheet that was missing a piece and blew out the oil lamp. Today, he had bought 2 rolls of cloth. Tomorrow, he would cut out a new bedsheet. The bedsheet was missing a piece, and it looked really awkward. Chapter 704. That night, at King Feng's residence. "Your Highness, we can't let them go on like this. The officials of several provinces are complaining, and the people's grievances are increasing every day. I'm afraid that Feng Province, which we have been managing for so long, will be destroyed in their hands." The person who spoke was the provincial governor of Feng Province. He was pacing back and forth anxiously in his room. According to the plan, the first prince's actions in Feng Province should have reached the capital by now and caused a huge reaction. If they were to hurry, there should be a reply after such a long time. However, the reply didn't come. The increasingly unscrupulous imperial censors had caused an impact that couldn't be ignored in Feng Province. In the face of the first prince's deliberate targeting, if they continued to sit back and do nothing, there would be some irreparable losses. Zhao Yi heard this and frowned slightly. Although the other party's actions in Feng province were related to the personal grudge between him and the first prince, it was an official matter on the surface. If he obstructed them, he would definitely become a laughingstock. The imperial censors had always been merciless and couldn't be ignored. He couldn't advance or retreat. A helpless expression appeared on Zhao Yi's face as he muttered, "Brotherly, brotherly, you have given me a difficult problem this time." The provincial governor of Feng province looked at him and asked doubtfully, "What did your highness say?" "Nothing." Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "Provincial Governor Zhou, you can go back first. I have my own arrangements for this matter." The middle-aged man nodded and left the room. Zhao Yi walked over. Just as she was about to close the door, she suddenly heard a sound like silk tearing, followed by a bang. He turned his head and saw a dagger inserted straight into the door, all the way to the hilt. A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Yi's face. He took out a handkerchief from his bosom and held the hilt. He didn't use much strength and easily pulled out the dagger. It was obvious that it was an extremely sharp weapon. "Who is it?" Zhao Yi stood at the door and looked into the courtyard. He asked loudly. There was no response for a long time. He waved at the guard who was walking towards him and walked into the room. He took out a few pieces of paper from the dagger and carefully placed the dagger on the table. He didn't know who could sneak into the prince's mansion and deliver a message with a dagger, but the content of the message should be very important. "Silver?" But when he saw the first sentence written on the paper, he frowned. As time passed, the expression on his face first became solemn, then puzzled, surprised, and finally stunned. What was written on it was a system called Silver for Trial of Crimes. As the name suggested, the content of this system was to pay for crimes with money. Depending on the severity of the crime committed by the officials, they would be exempted from certain punishments by a certain amount of silver. Although this law could solve the country's financial problems in a short period of time, in the long run, corruption would inevitably spread to the point where it could not be suppressed, and the country would not be far from destruction. What was strange was that these pieces of paper described in detail the evils of the silver for trial of crimes. They quoted scriptures and discussed the major crimes committed by the silver for trial of crimes. For example, using money to pay for crimes would make the officials who paid the silver for trial of crimes even more unbridled and fearless, and the officials would become more corrupt. With the silver for trial of crimes, the officials would exploit the people even more, and the country would be in turmoil. Finally, using money to pay for crimes would not be pursued, and the law would become useless. The law would collapse, and the country would perish. Of course, more importantly, it was clearly written on the paper that the eldest prince was going to vigorously implement the silver for trial of crime system. This was simply encouraging evil practices and promoting unhealthy practices, with the intention of destroying the Qi kingdom. The person who wrote this letter was originally an expert who wandered around the world. He was unwilling to see the state of Qi destroyed in the hands of such a person. Thus, he sent a letter with a dagger to expose the matter. He hoped that he could announce this matter to the world and let everyone see the ugly face of the first prince. Zhao Yi put down the letter and sat by the table. His right index finger tapped on the surface of the table. If this matter was true, and the eldest prince really wanted to implement this method of destroying the country, then he would have a good reason to do so. He would not need to care about the censors and the opinions of the people in the capital, and the siege of Feng province would be resolved. The problem was, who had sent this letter? How did he find out about this matter? And how did he enter the prince's residence? No matter what, he would not believe the words of a wandering expert. Who could it be? Zhao Yi's index finger tapped on the surface of the table a little faster as he murmured. At this moment, there was a knock on the door. Zhao Yi got up and walked to the door. He asked, "What is it?" "I forgot something." An old voice rang out, and the door bolt broke. Zhao Yi saw a masked old man with white hair walk in. He walked to the side of the table and put away the dagger. When he walked out of the door, he glanced at Zhao Yi and casually stuck the other dagger into the door. He said, "It's a little dark, so I stuck it in the wrong place."
"Sorry."
Zhao Yi watched him walk into the courtyard. With a leap, He flew up to the roof and completely disappeared into the night.